Federal government approves 54 billion naira for the construction of Abba Odupani Calabar Road.
Senate confirms appointment of 2 ministerial nominees.
Former governor of Niger State, Muazu Babangida Aliyu, and PDP gubernatorial candidate Umar Mohammed Nasko granted bail.
And today on Good Morning Nigeria, we focus on the recommendations of the Constitution and Electoral Reform Committee.
Late African literary icon Professor Chinua Achebe once expressed his disappointment and frustration with the electoral system in Africa, and in particular that of Nigeria. These are his exact words: unless you have a process that makes secession easy and friendly, such that even opponents can smile, we still have a very long way to go.
A long way indeed, Blessing. Now, putting the history of elections in Nigeria in perspective, one cannot but agree with the late Professor Chinua Achebe that the journey to credible, free and fair elections is a marathon rather than a sprint. In other words, we still have a long way to go. It's also the business of our stakeholders.
Well, Kingsley, who you are referring to, pre-independence elections in Nigeria or the post-independence polls, I said between 64 to 1966, then 1979, 1983, 1999, as well as others that were held, that is after that period from 2003, 2007, 2011, and the last one here in 2015. There is always one complaint or the other by political gladiators of the day.
Now, politicians and the political parties, the electoral umpire, security agencies, the courts, and even the electorate have all at one time or the other been accused or have accused one another of being responsible for thuggery, violence, and sundry electoral practices, including, of course, the concomitant unending lawsuits, crisis of legitimacy, instability, and ultimately chaos in some instances.
Well, perhaps this explains the series of attempts to reform the electoral process and to ensure that elections are free, fair, and devoid of violence that has taken this disturbing trend in recent times.
Well, on assumption of office in 2015, that's 2 years ago, President Muhammadu Buhari gave assurance that his administration would strengthen the electoral process in order to improve its integrity and thereby hope to consolidate democracy in the country. This, of course, then led to the inauguration of a 25-member Constitution and Electoral Reform Committee headed by former Senate President Ken Nnamani. Now, that committee was inaugurated by the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice in October last year.
Well, after 7 months of deliberations, which included public hearings in the 6 geopolitical zones and the Federal Capital Territory, the committee on Wednesday this week submitted its report with some major recommendations. These include the unbundling of the Independent National Electoral Commission, as well as the creation of some agencies to handle some of the duties of this commission.
Well, the committee also proposed the establishment of the Political Parties and Electoral Offences Commission, as well as the Constituency Delineation Center, among other recommendations.
Although the committee did not propose the creation of Election Offences Tribunal, it's recommended, however, the expansion of regular courts, recruitment of more judges, as well as empowering them to effectively deal with electoral offenders.
Now, the report of the committee, together with its implications on the electoral system, as well as, of course, the Nigerian democracy in general, is our focus this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. My name is Kingsley Osadolo, and I welcome you to another edition of the program on the network service of Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. It was a windy and rainy, stormy night last night here at the Federal Capital Territory. But, of course, my colleague is back, hale and healthy, and looking sweet as blessing from a well-deserved vacation.
I did, actually. Thank you very much, Kingsley. Good to join you once again on the program. Well, In the course of the program, we shall take our complimentary segments and newspaper review. By now, you know, business, sports, foreign, as well as entertainment news. Even the weather outlook, like I said last night,
That's right.
is looking very bright in the Federal Capital Territory. I hope it's the same wherever you are watching us from this morning. Well, welcome to the program. And it's time now to join the newsroom. And here is Ogwa Onyedibia, looking really. Good morning to you, Ogwa.
Good morning, Blessing, and thanks for the compliment. Good morning, Kingsley.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us on the news this morning. The federal government is to spend about 54 billion naira for the construction of Aba Odupani Calabar Road that cuts across the three states in eastern part of the country. The Senate.
Proud that within 2 years we've made tremendous, progress. We've been able to restructure the economy on a very sound footing. We've succeeded in not just, looking for quick fixes, but we are addressing the fundamental issues of our economy.
Award of the Odupani to Ikotekpene Road, linking Akwa Ibom and Cross River states with a spur to Ibidep Itam. The road project was approved for award to Mrs. Julius Berger PLC.
The Senate has confirmed the nomination of Stephen Ikani Ocheni from Kogi State and Suleiman Zama Hassan from Gombe State as ministers of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Stephen Ocheni was the first to appear before the Senate and was asked questions by senators ranging from indivisibility of Nigeria to youth unemployment.
To realize enough revenue to be able to actualize the proposals in our budget.
Suleiman Zama Hassan, who had earlier undergone similar screening as an ambassadorial nominee at the Senate committee level, was asked few questions, after which he was asked to take a bow.
Realize enough revenue to be able to actualize the proposals in our budget.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has stressed the need to address what it described as high rate of HIV infections at the internally displaced persons camps in the Northeast. The legislators observed that all the 27 IDP camps in the area should be provided with HIV counseling and antiretroviral drugs.
That assessment results showed none of the 27 camps were providing HIV/AIDS awareness campaign, antiretroviral refills, continuous HIV counseling and testing.
Unscrupulous camp officials who, in the form of sex for money, food and freedom of movement, demand or extort for some services from people that are disadvantaged. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter.
To judicial matters now, Niger State High Court 2 has granted bail to former governor of the state, Dr. Muazu Babangida Aliyu, and the PDP gubernatorial candidate in the 2015 general elections, Umar Mohammed Nasko. The accused persons were arraigned for, among others, alleged breach of trust, conversion of over 2 billion naira to personal use. Dr. Muazu Babangida Aliyu is also accused of separately converting over 2 billion naira belonging to the state government for personal use.
The judge showed tremendous courage and he also demonstrated good knowledge of the law. I'll reflect on it. I will make efforts towards ensuring compliance with the bail conditions. If we don't succeed, I'll think about it. There are procedures through which one can reapproach the court.
The federal government has restated the commitment of the Buhari administration to upholding the freedom of the press. In a statement issued to mark the World Press Freedom Day 2017, Minister of Information and Culture Lai Mohammed described as inaccurate the recent survey by Reporters Without Borders, which alleged that Nigeria press freedom rating has been on a sustained decline since 2015. He said despite the inaccurate and fake news saturating the media space, the federal government has not put a single journalist behind bars as a result of his or her professional conduct. Lai Mohammed said even though there are reports that some states have been hard on some journalists and bloggers for alleged misconduct, it has not been the policy of this administration to join issues with the media because of its unflinching commitment to upholding the tenets of democracy, which include press freedom and freedom of speech. The minister said the recent incident involving the Punch correspondent covering the State House is an aberration, adding that the speed with which the order barring the correspondent from the State House was reversed has lent credence to the fact that this government is not out to muzzle the press. He recalled that the accreditation of the current chairman of the State House Press Corps, Ubale Musa, which was withdrawn by the previous administration, was immediately restored upon the assumption of office by the Buhari administration in order to give the media unhindered access to the seat of power. And away from that, the Bureau Executive Council of Code of Conduct Bureau says the public should not be deceived by the falsehood being spread that chairman and members of the Bureau have been removed from office by the Federal High Court. A statement by the head of Press and Public Relations Code of Conduct Bureau, Idris Mohammed, says the Bureau Executive Council advises public officers nationwide to remain compliant with the provisions of the Constitution relating to the Code of Conduct. According to the statement, the chairman and members are still carrying out their constitutionally prescribed responsibilities pending the determination of the filed injunction and an appeal against the judgment. The wife of the president, Aisha Buhari, has urged concerned persons in the nation's education sector to develop a new curriculum that would include the dangers of drugs and substance abuse among the youths. This was in a message at the Drug Awareness and Advocacy Training organized by Northern Governors' Wives Forum.
Drug abuse is a serious health and social issue which is leading cause of school dropouts, mental health deterioration, as well as crime and violence. A considerable number of victims of drug abuse are young people and alarmingly women.
The Northern Governors' Wives cannot do it alone. Inasmuch as we are mothers and leaders in our own states, but we need your help. We have to come out and say, yes, this is a problem in the North. We have to come out and say, yes, let's do something about it.
Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Blessing and Kingsley after this break.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Everyday air. Ordinary air. And then there's TomTom Air. There's air, and then there's TomTom Air. What are you breathing? New TomTom 5-piece pack.
So what's up, sweetheart? You really look like you're up to something.
I have a secret.
Okay.
I'll be going to Europe. next week.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Like you have your visa, your passport, your plane ticket?
No, not that way. Some men are helping us. We pay them, they take us through the desert, and then we cross the sea into Europe.
The desert, the sea. Isn't that the route where many have died?
Yes, it is indeed a very dangerous journey. In 2016 alone, 4,900 people died while crossing the Mediterranean Sea to enter Europe. Many were Nigerians. For the very few who survived the journey, they are forced into prostitution or other crimes just to survive. Eventually, they will be arrested and deported to Nigeria. Don't be a victim. Don't go this way.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Welcome back. The program is Good Morning Nigeria. Time now for our business reports. The Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority partners Consumer Protection Council on consumer rights in the aviation sector. Details with Shion Ogunlui.
All right, let's talk business now. The aviation sector is one of the most important sectors in the world, contributing immensely to any nation's GDP. Hence, it should be taken with more seriousness, especially when it relates to customer service and protection. To this end, the Consumer Protection Commission is partnering Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority to address related issues. Speaking on the recent experience of some Nigerians aboard Turkish Airlines from Houston, Texas to Abuja, Nigeria, Director General of the Consumer Protection, Babatunde Irukera, said poor consumer service will no longer be overlooked either on international or domestic flights. He urged Nigerian consumers to demand their rights at any point in time.
Treating consumers right is the right thing, and the right consumer service is not a plus. It's not an added plus. It's not the icing on the cake. It's a requirement. And what I would hope is that Nigerian consumers recognize that and demand that right. And when that right is not sufficiently addressed, remand their complaints to us, and with respect to aviation, to both us and the Civil Aviation Authority. And
the Director of Consumer Protection Department of the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, Adamu Abdullahi, said his authority would collaborate with the CPC to get justice for the student. Abdullahi said the airline had been notified, inquiries sought, and the responses of the inquiries would determine the next line of action.
This is an agreement between two countries. It's beyond aviation. It's really a foreign affairs issue. So therefore, when you force airlines to go into or to now address issues that are outside the convention, they report to their home countries and it becomes a foreign affairs issue between the two countries.
And on the foreign scene, UK Brexit Secretary David Davis poured cold water on the eye-popping exit cost that was floated Wednesday, saying that the final amounts paid by the country will be much lower. The size of the so-called Brexit bill is expected to be a key sticking point in divorce talks between the EU and the UK. The Financial Times reported Wednesday that the EU plans to demand an upfront payment of up to 100 billion euros, saying that the figure is significantly higher than the previous estimates, but the newspaper cautioned that the net cost to Britain would be reduced over the coming decades by reimbursement from the EU. And finally, on the business park, a Chinese conglomerate, NTA, has overtaken BlackRock to become Deutsche Bank's biggest shareholders after increasing its stake in the firm to nearly 10%. NTA became a major shareholder in Europe's largest investment bank after acquiring a 4.8% stake in March. And that's the package on the business news for now. Thanks so much for watching. The rest of the program continues shortly.
All right, thank you very much there for the business package on Good Morning Nigeria, which you're still watching us on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Next for us now, we'll take a look at the front pages, the headlines there in some of today's newspapers.
Joining us to look at the stories trending in today's dailies is our newspaper reviewer, Bayo. You're supposed to welcome him back. But
yes.
Anyway, all the same. Good morning.
Welcome back. You look well rested. Good morning.
I'm glad.
Good morning, and good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, pleasure to have you join us for the review segment. Of course, I'm sure the rain, you also experienced it in your part of town yesterday.
Yeah, it was quite,
the storm
heavy.
Was,
yes.
It was quite heavy. Yes. All right, I saw that some branches, torn off and trees uprooted coming to the office this morning.
Even some public utilities, poles, electrical poles.
Is a place in Kebbi. About 470 houses were destroyed from the rainstorm.
Yeah, it's a couple of I saw a couple of billboards also torn down, on the highway. All right, let's take a look at the front pages of the papers we have, beginning with the New Telegraph. That's a very busy front page. New Telegraph has as its lead story with a kicker, Senate. SGF's dirty deals, and 4 riders to that. Lawal, that's the suspended SGF, collected 450 million naira kickbacks from 5 companies and awarded 200 million naira consultancy contract for grass cutting. And senators insist on prosecution, transmit report to Buhari, and presidential committee spent 2 million naira on IDPs and 50 million naira on conferences. The report, of course, is in greater detail on page 2 of the New Telegraph. Above that is also a window of headlines, which you will find below the nameplate. Again, Buhari absent from FEC meeting, that's fake meeting, and still resting. Details of that story can be found on page 3. Atiku, how I nearly lost my job over 53 suitcases. Details of that story can be found on page 6. 53 suitcases happened in 1984. Hoodlums boggle Imo Assembly, that's on page 29. And EFCC plotting to plant weapons and money in my house. That's according to Ekweremadu, Deputy Senate President. Details of that story on page 4. Now, above the nameplate, you have this headline, Malabu Scandal. Federal government vows to recoup $1.1 billion paid by Shell and Ajib. And DPR revokes redundant refinery licenses. And NNPC woos investors for $33.5 billion investments. Now, second lead story, of course, you would find at the bottom half of the New Telegraph, just below the photograph there. The photograph, by the way, shows the governor and deputy governor of Rivers State, flanked by some traditional rulers, the Oni of Ife, Sultan of Sokoto, and the Amainabo of Opobo Kingdom. That took place yesterday in Port Harcourt. INEC official convicted for receiving 70 million naira bribe, and 2 others face trial over the Zionist 23 billion naira election funds. Details of that story can be found on page 3. Lesson.
All right, thanks, sir. I'll go over to the Daily Trust, some of the stories that you've read out trending as well. For the leading headline, why Buhari missed FEC meeting again. This is coming from the federal government. President will soon return to the United Kingdom for treatment. That story starts there, but continues on page 5. But just above that, you have this headline. Disquiet over NLNG Act amendments. All the details you'll find on page 13. The photograph is that of the construction of the River State Council of Traditional Rulers complex in Port Harcourt yesterday. And you have the listed traditional rulers as read by Kingsley in his own paper. Just beside the photograph, you find the story, court convicts INEC official over 23 billion naira Desani load. That story you find on page 4. Corporate Affairs Commission shift deadline for manual registration to May 15. That story you find on page 14. And quickly now to other stories, just below the photograph, you have about 3 story headlines there. State debt hit 4.08 trillion naira. This is come from the Bureau for Statistics. Page 3, we offer you the details. Senate sends reports on suspended SGF to presidency. That story is trending on page 13. And this particular story is about the militant, the attack FRS team at Patient Jonathan's Hotel. The details on page 5. The story about the president still trying to have his rest is trending on the front page of the Daily Sun. As president absent at FEC, Lai Mohammed says Buhari resting for quick recovery. Yeah, and there is a quote here, if the doctor says he should take a rest, I think you'll recover faster when you rest. when you ought to rest, rather than forcing yourself to work when you're not fit to work. That story is on page 6. Bayo.
Yes, actually, the president was in office on Tuesday, and the expectations were high that he would be at the Federal Executive Council. Like the Honorable Minister said, his doctor's advice that he should take it slowly and rest. And the Minister of Information added that he was at his office yesterday, and you also will recall that his doctor advised that he should take some rest. He chose yesterday to rest instead of attending the Federal Executive Council. He said the president has asserted as far back when he returned from UK that he has never been this sick before, and that he has been advised to take it easy. He says the president has been very transparent and forthright about his health. He described as bunkum reports and speculation that the president is being fed by intravenous means. Talking about allegations, Senator Ike Ekweremadu has raised alarm that the Economic and Financial Crime Commission are plotting to raid his residence, and this is sequel to plot to plant monies in several currencies as well as armament in his home. The Economic and Financial Crime Commission has also reacted to that. They say the alarm raised as the antics of planting monies and guns in suspects' home were very alien to their commission. They say the alarm smacks on scripted propaganda to distract and put the EFCC on the defense. And the spokesman for EFCC, Wilson Wojure, says such infantile imagination need not worry the distinguished senator if there is nothing in his cupboard. He says it is just mere scaremongering that is being carried away.
In addition to that particular story, the Daily Sun has it just beside a photograph there. Presidency plotting the mass arrest of ex-governors and PDP senators. And like you said, Ekweremadu EFCC trade words.
Yes.
That's why it's on page 6.
Even the former ministers in the previous government under the PDP have also raised alarm that there is a plan to deliberately target their members around the country. They also cite of concern the former governor of Jigawa that is facing charges of inciting violence in Jigawa State. But be that as it may, some newspapers are saying that the expectations are high that the 2017 budget will be laid before the National Assembly today. The papers that are speculating this include the Punch and also This Day. And they also, particularly This Day, says that the National Assembly has increased its budget from the original 120 billion to 150 billion. The Chairman Senate Committee on Appropriation, you will recall, had raised a concern that they were determined to pass the budget before the May 5th deadline. You will recall that the budget last year was signed into law on the 6th of May by President Muhammadu Buhari. However, he also raised alarm on the floor of the Senate that his home had been invaded and 18 files connected with the budget had been taken away. The police reacted immediately, said that it took away 38 files, 6 envelopes, and a laptop, and none contained anything about the budget. The budget proposal that was laid in December was for 7.3 trillion naira.
All right, so well, let's continue to focus on the National Assembly and watch out for developments there with regard to the appropriation bill for 2017.
Yes.
But let's take a brief look at the front page of the This Day newspaper to see the headlines that you were referring to earlier. You can see that it says, well, of course, the lead story relates to President Muhammadu Buhari. Federal government saying that Buhari will continue to rest until he's fit to work. We have already discussed that. Now, above the nameplate, you have that story that says Nigeria eyes a 6 months extension, exempting it from OPEC production cap. That has to do with the quota that the country is allocated. Now, just below the nameplate of This Day newspaper, you have that National Assembly increases its budget to 150 billion naira, lays 2017 appropriation bill today. That's Bayo, you've already discussed that, yes. With us. And then, of course, it says Dangote Group partners GSC Motors and buys companies' vehicles for its operations. Those are the headlines we can take immediately from This Day newspaper. Of course, you also have the story that we read from the New Telegraph a moment ago that court convicts INEC official to forfeit land and other assets to federal government. But Blessed, I just have this story. You can immediately see that on on the screen from page 3. It has to do with the nation's debt stock.
Yes.
I'm sure you were reading that from page 3 of New Telegraph. It says Nigeria's foreign debt stands at $11 billion in 2016. And this is attributed to the National Bureau of Statistics. That's the foreign debt is $11.41 billion, while domestic debt is 14.02 trillion. As at 2016. Now the stock of the debt, of course, its federal government has about 68% of that, and then of course you also have the states and the federal capital territory sharing that. So our foreign debt stock, according to NBS, $11.41 billion. Listen. All right. So, well, in the absence of anything else, but just let's say before, there's a sports story, by the way.
Yes.
I mean, let's see, the soccer governing body and indeed all stakeholders have been battling with racism. There's a story there that is continuing. Trust Sports. If we see that, yes, black players considering going on strike in Serie A. That's from Trust Sports. Black players considering going on strike in Serie A. But of course, you also have that saying teammates pushing Benzema towards Arsenal. Benzema, of course, is one of the strikers for Real Madrid. But Bayo, the question of the unending racism in Europe with regard to soccer.
Yes, most players of African descent often come for under this racist chant, particularly what they call the monkey chant in the stadium. FIFA has made very strong pronouncement about it, and FIFA had threatened to clear stadium where such a racist chant. But unfortunately, it happened to Sule Montari while he was playing for his Italian club side. He protested that, and he got a yellow card. And because he was incensed, he walked out of the field. He got a second yellow card, and it's likely that the Italian FA is going to ban him for a period of time. Now, his compatriots, his African descent brothers across Europe, has raised objection, and they say that all of them, in protest and in support of Sule Montari, should boycott the league, the matches this Saturday. However, the football authorities say only 10% of the crowd in the stadium were involved, and therefore they cannot do anything about sanctioning that club.
Well, if it's one person, it's enough to set your emotions.
Absolutely.
The same way the crowd will cheer you to victory, the same way they could bring your emotions down, you won't play badly.
That's right. That's right. I mean, of course, you have all kinds of so-called animals who are either, violence prone or, are fond of this racist chants, against players, so-called players of color. But I'm sure that the Italian FA, of course, have to do the needful, ensuring that black players, or players of color, as they call them, continue to have respect. And FIFA should also step immediately. I mean, I think that those 2 yellow cards will amount to a red, by the way. So I think they should be. They should overturn that and then move on. Bayo Toyobi, that's the much that we can take for the Super Review segment this morning. I would like to thank you for being with us.
Thank you too.
See you again tomorrow. All right. So this is Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing the recommendations of the Kanu Namani Committee on Electoral Reform.
From the south-south to the northeast, southeast to the northwest, southwest to the north-central, the Future Assured project and its component, Get Involved, is restoring hope to millions of Nigerian women and children.
We are actually doing a lot under Future Assured, the program of Her Excellency Mrs. Aisha Muhammad Buhari. And I believe what we are doing so far is impacting positively on the lives of women and children in Nigeria, particularly those in the internally displaced camps across the nation.
Get involved. Support the Future Assured initiative. Email programs@futureassured.org.ng. Future Assured, promoting and protecting the lives of Nigerian women and children.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. Now, to set the tone for our conversation this morning, we'll take a look at this background. There appears to be no end to the quest for perfect elections in Nigeria, as several committees have previously been set up to look at the dark spot of electoral processes. With the recent submission of the reports by Constitution and Electoral Reform Committee, led by former Senate President Ken Nnamani, Nigerians are again hoping that the next elections will be better than previous ones. Here's Saliu Abdullahi with this report.
Since the return of democracy in 1999, Nigeria has witnessed many attempts to strengthen the electoral process with series of reforms. Realizing the inadequacies of the existing framework, particularly after the 2015 general elections, the Buhari administration expressed resolve to broadly consult and interface with stakeholders on how to make the system better. Consequently, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, as directed by the President Muhammadu Buhari, inaugurated a 24-member committee led by a former Senate President, Ken Nnamani, on 4th October 2016. Members of the committee were selected from the political class, civil society groups, INEC, technocrats, and the academia. The committee was given 13 terms of reference to, among others, review and make recommendations on conflicting court judgments on legal disputes on past elections, review the laws impacting elections in Nigeria in relevant provisions of the 1999 Constitution as amended and the Electoral Act 2010 as amended. Others are to assess, review the lessons learned from the 2015 general elections, and make recommendations for improvement as they relate to the judicial decision and experience from field operations, review the extent of the implementation of recommendations of the 2008 Electoral Reform Commission headed by Justice Mohammed Uwais, commonly referred to as Uwais Report, and advise on outstanding issues for implementation. The committee was also mandated to come out with executive bills which the President will forward to the National Assembly. To achieve its mandate, the committee organized retreat and public hearings to interact with stakeholders and harvest quality ideas that will help advance the cause of democracy in the country. From Enugu in the southeast, Calabar in the south-south, Kaduna in northwest, Jos in the north-central, Gombe in the northeast, and Abeokuta in the southwest. The committee organized public hearings where Nigerians were invited to come and give their views on the assignment at hand. The Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, also hosted the session where Nigerians again used the platform to suggest areas that required changes in the nation's electoral process. It took the committee 7 months to submit the over 100-page report as against its earlier 10-week period. Having fulfilled its mandate, the committee submitted its report to the President through the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami.
Attached to it are 4 draft bills on amendment of relevant provisions of the Constitution, amendment of the Electoral Act, establishment of political parties and electoral offenses commission, and the establishment of constituency delimitation center.
With just 2 more years to another general elections, Nigerians are waiting to see the implementation of the committee's report, particularly the passage of the suggested bills by the legislative arm of government. Guests on Good Morning Nigeria are ready to analyze the recommendations of the Nnamani report.
All right, thank you very much there, Salihu Abdullahi, for that elaborate background report. Of course, our correspondent Salihu was also one of those who covered the proceedings of the committee which just submitted this report. But we have guests with us here in the Abuja studios as well as at our Kaduna Network Center to provide further details with regard to the recommendations of the committee. First, at this time, we'd like to welcome to our studios Professor Mamman Lawan. He was Secretary of the Constitution and Electoral Reform Committee. He's also Dean of the Faculty of Law at Bayero University, Kano. Professor Mamman, a pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, and then we also have with us here in the Abuja studios Mr. Sam Itodo. Sam Itodo is the Executive Director of YIAGA. YIAGA stands for Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement. Mr. Itodo, we're delighted to have you join us on the program. All right, blessing.
Yes, we'd also like to welcome here in the studio Honorable Mohammed Lawal Nalabo. He's National Chairman, Accord Party, and also National Chairman, Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC. Good to have you, Honorable Nalabo. And in our Kaduna studio, we'd like to welcome constitutional lawyer, Barrister Okoye. Good to have you join us this morning.
Good morning.
All right, Kingsley, back to us in the studio.
Well, let's begin the conversation straight away with the Secretary of the committee, which just submitted this report, Professor Lawan. I mean, the obvious question to ask is, the committee which just submitted this report is certainly not the first. 10 years ago, we had the Ways Committee on the heels of the very contentious 2007 elections. And then you had the 2014 National Conference, which also made its own recommendations. And then you've had various committees in the National Assembly, the House and the Senate, also seeking to reform the electoral process, including the Electoral Act and all of those pertinent issues. What is different this time?
Right, thank you very much. Like you said, the OS committee was established about 10 years ago, and I think that is enough reason why we should have another committee because of the importance of elections in Nigeria and all over the world. Now, there are also issues that have not been tackled by the OS committee, and the federal government now, in its own wisdom, decided to have another committee to help look at those issues. In addition, the OS committee made far-reaching recommendations, some of which have not been implemented by the government. So this government now wants another committee to have a look at these recommendations, what was implemented, what was not implemented, and to see whether those that have not been implemented, we should have another recommendation to implement them and why. So these are some of the reasons why this committee was set up by the federal government.
All right, so what are the recommendations?
Exactly. What is new?
What's new in our committee?
What's new in the outcome of your committee's work? In other words, you have a set of recommendations. What's new? What's different from what we had before?
Well, there are a lot of things that are new. An example that could be cited is this issue of inconclusive elections. We saw it in the Kogi gubernatorial elections in 2016, where in the midst of elections before the declaration of results, a candidate died. And the country was faced with a situation whereby no law made provision for this kind of situation. And we were faced with some kind of constitutional crisis. Now, this is one of the issues that our committee has tackled. And I think it's a very, very important issue.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Lawan. Okay, let's quickly take on the response from the Chairman IPAC. Of course, these recommendations, just like other committees have seen to other recommendations, how does this sit well with political parties, or how do you think it will be with political parties?
Yes, when the committee was formed, political parties became very happy because it has been long overdue for some of the provisions in the Electoral Act to be reviewed. So when the issue came up, we submitted a memorandum to solicit for some changes.
What kind of changes?
Well, there are some areas where we had a problem of, the interpretation of electoral acts. It's in some cases or in some areas, it indicates that political parties have upper hand when it comes to selecting a representative to participate, to represent the party in election. And in some areas, you see that INEC is often having upper hand. So such areas where we have such disagreements have to be reviewed and looked at properly so that we can have stability.
So which could you describe as the most gladdening of the recommendations for you? There is one of the recommendations talking about issue of candidates, at least that is individual candidates now, and some other areas. Which one would be gladdening for political parties to see?
You mean you're talking
some of the yes, part of the recommendation given by the report now. Which is the most gladdening for political parties beyond that which you have proposed earlier?
In our memorandum, we suggested that INEC should be unbundled so that we can have more effectiveness in the conduct of elections and management of political parties in Nigeria. And I think the committee has captured that. So these are the areas that if consideration is given, definitely it will bring some sanity in the politics of Nigeria today.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Samson Itodo, of course, your Executive Director, Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement. I haven't seen this recommendation as presented in the report. Where do the young people stand in the overview of what is being presented, different from other committees' report that we've seen in the past?
Well, I've not read the full report. I've not seen the report. So whatever comment I will make is based on media reports as well as what maybe the Secretary will share on this platform. So I've not seen the full details of the report. But I think that first, at the outset of this, I'm perhaps one of those persons who actually think that whilst the federal government should be commended, there are actually fears that have been expressed on what this report will be used in our electoral reform process. One of the fantastic things the committee did was the fact that across the different geopolitical zones, young people participated through the Not Too Young to Run campaign and advocating for the lowering of the age for running for office. I don't know if that's captured in the report because I've not seen that in all the press reports that we've seen. But the second layer of the Not Too Young to Run bill was independent candidacy. And that was really captured by the committee. So I think to the extent of that, we commend the committee for mainstreaming that into their report. But the fact must also be made that for now, I don't see anything new in the committee's recommendations, different from what we've seen both from the OASIS report, or even a lot of these issues have been addressed with the recent amendments by the Senate. If it's in relation to what the provisions of the law as to what happens if a candidate dies in the course of an election before results is declared. You recall the Kogi incident, the INEC actually relied on Section 33 of the Electoral Act, which to an extent didn't take care of the challenge we saw in Kogi, but that has been addressed by the Senate. So if you look at this report, at the Senate amendments, there are a lot of convergence, and I think that it clearly shows that these are topical issues that we need to address within our own electoral process.
All right, Mr. Samson Itodo, thank you very much. We'll come back to you later on in the course of the conversation. To go over now to our Cardinal Network Center, where we are like introduced Mr. Festus Okoye, is a lawyer, of course, also a familiar face of Good Morning Nigeria. Mr. Festus Okoye, of course, I mean, you make comments on these issues. You were a member of the 2014 National Conference, and you're quite familiar with matters pertaining to election and election matters. From your perspective, what is significant about the recommendations of the, shall we say now, the Kenan Amani Committee?
Well, it is true. I was a member of the Justice Uwe's committee that was set up by former President Yar'Adua in 2007. And I also served in the Political Parties and Electoral Matters Committee of the 2014 National Conference. Now, as Samson pointed out, my own knowledge of what has been recommended by the present committee depends on my reliance on what the media has reported. Now, for me, this present committee is more or less like an implementation committee, a committee that was saddled with the responsibility to look at what has been done in the past and then pull them together for purposes of getting the National Assembly to do what they were supposed to do almost 10 years ago. The committee made basically, I think, 6 to 7 fundamental recommendations, although some of these recommendations were made by the Justice Uwais Committee and also by the political parties committee of the National Conference. One of the recommendations is the conclusion of all electoral disputes before anybody is sworn into office. They also made recommendations relating to independent candidature, but unlike the Uwais Committee that made recommendation relating to independent candidature for every category of elective office, they restricted their own to certain offices. They also made recommendations relating to the creation of political parties and electoral offences commission. The Uwais Committee recommended the creation of a political parties registration and regulatory commission and an electoral offences commission separately. But the 2014 National Conference recommended the merger of both. That is the creation of a political parties registration and electoral offences commission, which this particular committee has adopted. The Uwais Committee also recommended issues around not allowing cross-carpeting for any manner, for any purpose whatsoever. This committee has also emphasized on that. The Uwais Committee recommended the integration of the State's Independent Electoral Commission into one central electoral management body for the country. This present committee has also recommended that. And also this committee has also recommended issues around the conduct of direct party primaries. For me, these are very laudable recommendations. This committee has also emphasized the centrality of some of these recommendations that have been made in the past in our electoral process. However, just two of the recommendations, although we made it at the Justice Uwais Committee, made those recommendations, but if you look at them critically, they have very, very serious challenges to the electoral process. The first is the issue of independent candidature. If you look at what this committee has recommended, it recommended that we should have independent candidature in relation to the election of the president, governors, and chairpersons of the various local governments. It is problematic. Now, as at the 15th day of March 2017, we have in existence 40 political parties and 86 pending applications. This relates to the lacks in relation to section 221 to 224 of the Constitution relating to registration of political parties. Everything in those sections relates to paperwork. The only tough thing in those sections relates to having an office in the Federal Capital Territory. Every other thing is paperwork. So the political parties or political associations have exploited this particular provision to recycle their associations, and some people also have 3, 4, or 5 political parties because the conditions for registration of political parties is very, very loose. The second problematic issue relates to the conduct of, relates to the disposal of all election disputes before anybody is sworn in. If you look at the law very well, section 285, subsection 5 of the Constitution has made it clear that all election petitions must be determined within a period of 180 days. Appeals arising from the election petitions must be determined within a period of 60 days in the Court of Appeal and another 60 days in the Supreme Court. That is for presidential elections and governorship elections. Senatorial, House of Assembly, and House of Representative elections ends at the Court of Appeal. The implication is that by law, by the Constitution, election disputes can only be determined within a period of 10 months for presidential and governorship elections, and maybe within a period of 8 months for other categories of elections. What that means is that we must abridge the tenure of office of all categories of elected officers if we are going to get to this. Secondly, you are going to be leaving a vacuum which is dangerous in a presidential democracy like ours. What that means is that if all elected officers are not sworn in within a particular period, there will be a vacuum. And you have 40 political parties, maybe 100 by the time we get to elections, all filing election petitions. That means nobody will be sworn in. So I think that we need to take a second look at this particular recommendation and smoothen it so that it doesn't create a constitutional problem for the people of the country. But I agree with the committee that issues around cross-carpeting should be dealt with seriously. Issues around openness of political parties should be dealt with, and the creation of a political parties and electoral offences commission is also a very, very laudable thing. What is remaining is for civil society groups, political parties, and all the critical stakeholders in this country to push to see that some of these recommendations are dealt with by the appropriate organs of the National Assembly and the State House of Assembly, and by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, so that we will have a closure, a temporary closure relating to our running to the Constitution all the time, anytime we have very small challenges. Like the Kogi elections, which Samson referred to, if we pay attention to our courts, if we have certain level of fidelity to our democratic institutions, the Supreme Court has given us the leeway and let down the ground norm on how disputes arising from such issues should be determined. So if we pay attention to what the Supreme Court does as part of our democratic institutions, we do not have to run back to amend the Constitution all the time when we have serious, electoral challenges. So I think that let us pay attention to the implementation of these particular recommendations and then relax for a while and see how they work within our electoral process before we embark on another round of amendments.
All right, Festus Okoye, thank you very much there for your detailed response to our question with regard to atomizing some of the key recommendations of the committee together with your comments thereon. Let's return now to our guests in the studios. Gentlemen, just before we get further, and my colleague here, Blessing, before we get further into a deeper analysis of some of the key recommendations, what would be your reaction, Alhaji Nalado, to the comments made by some persons that, look, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what kind of law or laws you have, that it is the conduct, the attitude and disposition of stakeholders, including politicians, political parties, and those who are desperate for office, that cause all the challenges that we have. So you can have, I mean, when the 1999 Constitution was being framed, nobody said that this was a constitution for confusion. In 1979, nobody framed the Constitution for confusion. But in practice, what we find, it's a chaotic political environment, in particular, chaotic, inconclusive, elections. So is all of this, therefore, likely to be a waste of time when politicians are unlikely to change their attitude?
No, not really. You see, like many people have said about this last committee headed by former Senate President Namani, people have commended them for doing a very good job. What is left is for us Nigerians to make sure we follow the recommendations made to make sure that we embrace peace. You know, we have to have that national feeling in us. Whatever we are going to do, we should know that the effect is going to, the consequences of whatever we do is going to be on us directly. So I think it is better the laws be reviewed. And when they are reviewed, then we now talk to people. Like we politicians, it is our duty to go out and sensitize voters. You know, most of the problems arise, you know, during electioneering campaigns, before, during, or after elections. So if voters can be sensitized properly, I think all these issues can be addressed properly.
Well, so I'm sorry, Alhaji, it's not just sensitizing voters. the voters will go out there to queue, but when they are on the queue seeking to cast their votes, of course, the thugs will come and disrupt the process. Politicians or their agents will also manipulate the results. And so some voters will say, oh, why should I go there to waste my time? We're actually talking about a democratic culture. Do politicians and other critical stakeholders, have a democratic disposition to say, look, here are the rules. Let's play by the rules so that we don't waste our time, investing so much energy and resources trying to change the law and change the constitution. And at the end of the day, no, say, look, there's a problem here. That's the question I'm asking.
Yes, but you see, if you look at look at the conduct of the last election, the last general election, that is 2015 election, compare it with the previous ones we had before 2015, you will see that level of litigation has gone down. I think it depends on how the umpires handle situations. If the umpires would be fair, then definitely I am assuring you that our electoral processes will be maintained peacefully. So the problem is with the umpires. If you are not doing the right thing, then definitely people will react.
Okay, let me express a slight dissent. I think that when you talk about elections, it's a multi-stakeholder engagement. So it's beyond the Electoral Commission. You've got the political parties. And truth be told, that what we have seen within our own climate, it's not just the Electoral Commission. Because let's take an example. Section 87 of the Electoral Act is clear on party primaries. The provisions are clear that political parties ought to notify INEC that they are going to be conducting their primary within 21 days. Now, what you see is the parties don't even comply by that basic, very, very basic provision. And look at how chaotic the party primaries are. The case of Ondo is one in point, where a particular political party, in fact, for that particular election, there are about 11 different court judgments just on the emergence of candidates within the parties. And you need institutions. I agree that, yes, the electoral umpire ought to be independent because that's one of the fundamentals for credible elections. But the other stakeholders, the political parties, look at Imo North senatorial elections. Look at all is it the intimidation of election officials? Is it in Imo North where a trailer load of stones and sand was used as blockade and it prevented the Electoral Commission from conducting the elections? That happened in Bayelsa. That also happened in Kogi. That also happened in Edo. It happened in Ondo. It wasn't about whether the Electoral Commission was unbiased or it was impartial. What about the case of Edo, for instance, where INEC, we were all in Edo during the stakeholders meeting with the INEC chairman and the DIG of operations of police, when right here in Abuja, they were forced to postpone that election. It wasn't about whether INEC was really transparent, but the point I make is election is a multi-stakeholder enterprise, and everybody, particularly the political parties, when they don't play by the rules, they create chaos within our electoral process, agencies as well. And I agree with you, it's not about the functionality of our law, it's about that culture. And for us in Nigeria, our attitude towards politics, this zero-sum attitude and the do-or-die approach that we adopt in our politics is what's responsible for where we are.
Professor Lawan, yes, of course, you're familiar with the dynamic of law and social change and the impact of social change and law. From what has been said now, what is your take, plus other comments you would like to make?
Yeah, the comments are valid to the extent that we cannot dismiss the relevance of law in this respect. You see, the attitude of stakeholders is something that we should aim to change in Nigeria. But what would you use to change the attitude of the stakeholders? Whatever you decide to do, you must not dispense with law. Law is a very important tool to control the attitude of persons. And that is why in this committee, we came up with very, very stiffer penalties for electoral offenders. In fact, what we suggested is to have an increase by 100% of the punishments that have been provided for in the Electoral Act for electoral offenses. Of course, we have not recommended for the establishment of electoral offenses tribunal. But in order to have good management of the election process and good investigation and prosecution of electoral offenders, we recommended that there should be established the Political Parties and Electoral Offences Commission, with powers to register and regulate political parties, with also clear powers in the law to investigate and prosecute electoral offenders. This is part of the unbundling of INEC. This has been the responsibility of INEC over the years. And from the interactions we have had over the few months, we have discovered that INEC has a lot of work on it. So we decided that this must be reduced in order to ensure that INEC is performing mainly the function of organizing and conducting elections in the country. So,
and if I should add more light to what he has said, you see, the problem that political parties are facing today is the issue of people that come from outside to come and hijack political parties' processes.
Outside where?
I mean, there are some that are not politicians, but because they have a lot of money, they will come and use their money to influence the decision of political parties.
Are they not members of such political parties that are also?
Well, some of them could be members, but some are just coming to join the political parties. And parties are now facing a lot of financial problems, you know. The government used to fund political parties before, and that is always our outcry. Government should listen to us. Let them be funding political parties so that we can block.
So that political parties will be like parastatals that they have been or something?
It's not parastatals, but we have a lot of commitment. We have to, before you become a registered political party, you have to have an office in Abuja. You have to recruit staff that will be running the offices. So if you don't have ways of getting money, how would you run this structure?
Well, that's a blessing. I would like Sam Itodo to respond to this before we return to Festus Okoye. First, gentlemen, the unbundling of INEC, which has been recommended by this committee, is to the effect that, okay, INEC has a lot of administrative work to do. It's an election management body. But if you look at the provisions in the Constitution relating to the regulation and control and monitoring of political parties, INEC would appear not to have done well on that score. I do not know, for instance, whether there's been any publication relating to the accounts of political parties. If there are accounts, as he say, you are seeking government support, don't you have your membership subscription? How many members do you have? Do you have a credible membership register? In the first instance, how much do you collect, from your members? What do you have in your kitty? Do we need a separate body to be able to manage, monitor political parties so that INEC, of course, now faces the issue of conducting elections? Itodo.
I completely agree with Justice Uwe's committee's recommendation, as well as the Ken Namani committee's report on the need to unbundle the Electoral Commission, but I probably would not agree to the recommendation that the Political Parties Regulatory Commission and the Electoral Offences Commission should be merged together for very, very obvious reasons. The truth is, INEC is presently constituted. And they say it is he who wears the shoes know where it hurts the most. Two successive chairmen of the Electoral Commission have come out to say we cannot perform this task of prosecuting electoral offenders. Look at the number of convictions that INEC actually secured, about 200 or 250 so far out of the over 1 million multiple registrants and even electoral offenders arrested during the course of even the 2011 and the 2015 elections. Because if you look at electoral offences prosecution, it's in 3 stages. First, there is arrest, there's investigation and prosecution. And arrest and investigation, it's not within the competence of the Electoral Commission. Another security agency, the police, does that before those case files are transmitted to the Electoral Commission. And then there are issues relating to either staffing or even funding for prosecuting these electoral offences. So I completely agree that INEC needs to be unbundled. For registration of political parties, it's very, very critical because our political parties, quite frankly, are a very, very difficult set of institutions to work with for very, very obvious reasons. One, you've talked about the fact that these parties are not really, they don't consider themselves as developmental organizations. So issues relating to core basic institutional issues, they're still grappling with them, like membership register. Go today, no political party can give you an updated and authentic register of voters. And that is the foundation. Because that's the basis. And I keep saying when parties actually advocate to be funded by the state, I make the argument, I am yet to see any literature that shows that a party becomes more democratic when it is funded by the state. And if political parties are associations, and you've got a fundamental right to join any association of your choice. And I say, if you don't have the financial might or the competence to operate a political party, there's nothing wrong in saying, hey, you know what, we're going to fold up and perhaps convert yourself into a pressure group, and don't allow the state to be funding political parties. Because what we have seen over the years, I experienced...
I think I need to clarify some issues raised by Festus Okoye. He was trying to make a comparison between the OAS recommendation and the Ken Nnamani recommendations. I can understand why he is making these comments, particularly that the report has not been made public. He's just relying on media reports on this. One of the issues is regarding SECs, State Electoral Commissions. While the OAS committee recommended for the integration of the state independent electoral commissions into INEC, in our own recommendation, we asked for the scrapping of INEC completely. Scrapping of SECs completely. Because going by the views of the members of the public during the public hearings we conducted in the 6 geopolitical zones, majority of those who spoke on the issue of state electoral commissions called for the scrapping of these commissions. So this is a recommendation that we made. And then regarding the election disputes matter, the OAS committee addressed only post-election matters. In our own case, we also addressed pre-election matters. And we recommended for the reduction in the number of days for handling these matters, both ways, pre-election, post-election. For pre-election, we said all pre-election matters must be heard and determined before the conduct of elections. What we have now on ground, you can have a pre-election matter going on up to the point a person will finish his term in office. And then you'll find a decision coming after the person has left office.
All right, Professor Maman, just so that we can take the issues, seriatim, one after the other. Festus Okoye, at our Kaduna Network Center, let's back up a bit. Professor Maman here has made some clarification with regard to the specific recommendations that were made. But I would like us to still deal with the question of the regulation of political parties as well as a commission, to deal with a commission or a tribunal to deal with electoral offenses. From your perspective, exactly how can we, as Nigerians, as widespread stakeholders, handle the question of having much more efficient and effective political parties, properly called political parties with proper register, proper funding from amongst their members or donations, not some slush funds and so on and so forth. Do you think that a commission with oversight of this process will be required, and therefore, we have a process of weeding out, those parties that indeed cannot be called political parties?
I completely agree that we need a political parties registration and regulatory commission to deal with some of these issues. Now, one of the mistakes that people make is to think that the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria recognizes what they call smaller parties. If you look at the provisions of the Constitution from section 221 up to 229, you will see that the framers of the Constitution only want political parties that are national in outlook. And that is why, if you look at section 223 of the Constitution, it says that in forming its organs, in terms of its governing boards, that a political party must pay attention to the federal character of Nigeria, and that the leadership of its governing board or organs must reflect 2/3 membership of all the states of the federation. What that means is that the framers of the Constitution only want political parties that are national in outlook and not political parties that are only based in the Federal Capital Territory or political parties that are based only in one state. That is one. Secondly, most of these political parties do not even know who their members are. Some of them don't even have a membership register. And that is why when I looked at the recommendation relating to the conduct of direct primaries, I feel that is very, very problematic. Because I know of individuals who belong to all the political parties in Nigeria. They have the membership card of all the political parties. Anywhere any political party is doing anything, any rally or any program, they go there. There is no fidelity to any political party program or any political party ideology or principles. The third issue is that I think that our political parties must be political parties properly so-called. They are very, very problematic. Very, very small internal issues that can be easily resolved by the different organs of the political party are allowed to fester. There is no political party in this country as of today that is healthy. The PDP as a political party is not healthy. The APC as a political party is not healthy. The ABGA as a political party is not healthy. There is no healthy political party in Nigeria today in terms of having some level of cohesion, not having any form of internal dissension. So they are not healthy. What we need are political parties that are properly managed, political parties with clear membership register, political parties that will embrace the electronic age in which we are, where they are going to have their membership register electronically stored and know who their members are. We are also supposed to have political parties that have functional and verifiable offices in at least 2/3 of all the states of the Federation, so that they can have proper national outlook, and not a political party where you will call the number given by the political party and it will ring in a business center. Those are not the type of political parties we need. We do not need a political party that will never field candidate for any election, but will gang up, claiming that they are supporting the candidate of another political party. So let us have political parties properly so-called, and not political parties that exist just because it is fashionable to have political parties.
Alongside this issue of the political parties, regulations as well as other measures that we're trying to do to bring on to streamline the activities. Now, the issue of independent candidacy or candidature have been raised. How do you see this impacting on the political landscape on the long run?
Look, the Justice Uwais Committee recommended independent candidature, and there is supposed to be a threshold for you to get into the ballot. If you look at the white paper that was issued as a result of the Uwais Committee's report, the white paper committee was headed by the then Minister of Police Affairs, I think Dr. Shetima. They redrafted the threshold for you to get to the ballot. For councillors, you must have at least 100 signatures of eligible voters from a particular ward, and then for members of the House of Reps, you must have at least 80, and then it graduates to the president that must have at least 10 signatures from each ward of the Federation before you can get into the ballot. My take is that if you want independent candidature, you must reframe the framework for the registration of political parties so that we can have a reduction in the number of political parties we have and then increase in the number of independent candidates. If you do not reduce the number of political parties we have, what that means is that we are going to have around 100 political parties on the ballot and maybe 50 independent candidates on the ballot too. And this will create a very serious problem. For me personally, it is easier for an independent candidate to win election to a state assembly, to win election as a councillor, and also to win election to the House of Representatives or to win election to the Senate, than for an independent candidate, as has been suggested, to win a presidential election, to win a governorship election or chairmanship election. Just as an aside, if an independent candidate wants to contest an election and wants to deploy party agents to the 120,000 polling units in the country, paying them 5,000 naira each, you will know the quantum of money that independent candidate has to spend. The implication is that you must be a billionaire before you can even dream of getting into the ballot to contest a presidential election or senatorial election or governorship election. So my own take is that if we must have independent candidature, let us limit independent candidature to the local governments, to state assemblies, to House of Representatives and senatorial elections, and leave governorship and presidential elections out of it. For me, if an independent candidate wins a presidential election, and the person goes into the State House and has in the Senate one political party having 90 senators, the other one having the rest, and then another political party controlling the House of Representatives, and the other one having a sizable majority. How will that how will that president function in such a situation? So I think that let us rejig this issue of independent candidature by looking at our political parties and also reducing their number through tightening the conditions for registration of political parties, and then we can have independent candidature. Because the 86 pending applications we have now, pending with the Independent National Electoral Commission, are like independent candidates, because some of the political parties, or some of the associations that want to be registered, some of them are just 10 in number. So there's definitely a problem.
All right, Festus Okoye, thank you very much. We'll come back to you to get your comments on other aspects, just to indicate now that we are taking reactions from viewers who have sent in their tweets at NTA GMN. Sunday Michael Omakoji, one of our regulars, again, says any reform without the inclusion of electronic voting is a child's play. And a lot of beautiful blueprints have been submitted in the past, but our long-standing problem is lack of implementation.
Another regular, Dele Jack Solomon, says the committee's recommendations will strengthen the INEC and to ensure independent candidacies, the management and tackling of electoral offences. One of the recommendations of the report is to discourage attempt by politicians to win elections at all costs. But will they allow this?
Suleiman Zuntu tweets, it's a laudable initiative. I hope the Executive Council, that's Federal Executive Council, will adopt the recommendations. However, the process should explore and see the merits associated with the various recommendations.
And from Festus Akimboyewa, what will move Nigeria forward is a functioning government and opposition that will provide decent scrutiny and not endless electoral reforms.
All right, those are the tweets that we have in the meantime. Just to return to our guest here in the Abuja studios, Professor Maman. Of course, your committee has already submitted this report, but listening to the points articulated by Festus Okoye with regard to placing a ceiling on independent candidacy, what was the committee's attitude to this, assuming it was considered?
Yeah, we considered this issue alongside the need to discourage mushroom political parties. What we did was to place a cap for independent candidates to emerge. There has to be nomination by at least 25 registered voters in each ward where that person wants to contest an election. There is also the requirement for the payment of 10% of the maximum expenses approved for election campaigns. And then the third one is limiting it to the office of the president or governor or chairman of a local government. Now, for the mushroom political parties, what we decided to do and recommended is to fix some kind of fee to be paid initially by a political association to have access to the ballot, because we realize by the time you have multiple political parties, it will be very, very inconvenient for the electoral management body to even print the ballot papers. And if they print them, it will be inconvenient even for voters to use them in voting. At times, the length of the paper would even affect the validity of the elections when it comes to issue of folding. Now we said, after paying the initial fee, for you to have continued access to the ballot paper, you must have at least 10% of the total votes cast in the subsequent elections. So that when you pay the fee initially and you have access to the ballot, in the subsequent elections, if you are unable to get 10% of the total votes scored, in the subsequent elections you will be dropped from the ballot. You will not have access. You can only remain as an association not having access to the ballot. This is one of the the things we...
Sorry, when you say access to the ballot, exactly what do you mean? That's to say to field a candidate for an election?
You cannot have representation in the ballot having your logo, your candidate represented in the ballot, just like other political parties who are able to score more than 10% of the votes.
That amounts to a loss of deposit.
Of course, you are losing the deposit.
Anyway, Kingsley, I think let's take some other areas that were made as recommendation. Now, Mr. Etodu, yes, earlier on we talked about issue of human elements of manipulation as well as other aspects of violence recorded in our elections process. Now, the recommendation from the committee says something about the use of technology as well as other aspects of electronic voting as being canvassed or used in other advanced economies of the world. Now, they also looked at a provision for diaspora voting. Is Nigeria ripe for all of that now?
For diaspora voting?
Well, looking at the challenges of conducting even the one with the people here.
Well, I think that first, the place of elections in a democracy is very, very critical. And when you take inclusion out of a democratic process or elections, democracy loses its vitality. And I've consistently made the point that efforts must be made to promote inclusion. But whilst also advocating for inclusion, we must do that within our own remit, within our own political context, and what we can handle. With respect to electronic voting and the increase used for technology within our electoral process, I think if there is one development that we have seen in our electoral process is the consistent deployment of technology for our elections. Our voters register is biometric today and is used for technology. We've got electronic accreditation of voters. It's just the EVS, which is the electronic voting, is where we've not come to. But even the electoral law, as presently framed under Section 52, sub 2 of the Electoral Amendment Act 2015 that was amended at the during the 2015 elections, that the procedure for an election shall be determined by the Electoral Commission. And that amendment was made to expunge Section 52 sub 2 that says in the previous act that electronic voting shall be prohibited at this material time. If you look at what the Senate did now is to clearly prescribe within that particular provision that electronic voting shall be used or any other procedure as determined by the Electoral Commission. Although when you now go to Section 49 of the Electoral Act that deals with a card reader based on the current Senate amendment, I think that as a country it is important that we continue to use technology. But are we ready to use electronic voting in 2019? I would say no, we are not ready to use electronic voting. I think that we've got a couple of elections, perhaps maybe 2023, we can explore using EVS, even though our whole life is being regulated by technology. But as we need to consistently improve, because in Africa, only Namibia has used electronic voting, and that came with a lot of challenges. There are pros and cons. With respect to diaspora voting, I think the most profound argument that one has heard on that is about data. How do you manage data? But Niger Republic, few months ago, conducted elections, and people in Sokoto actually voted for in that national elections. I think that our diaspora community are very, very useful and critical, and they need to be mainstreamed into our electoral process. If you look at the FDIs and their investment in the country, I think it is important that we create that avenue for them to exercise their franchise. And I completely support diaspora voting. In fact, election observers, INEC officials, and even security agencies, and even members of the press who are on election duty don't get to vote on election day. And that's why it's important to introduce early voting. Beyond diaspora voting, early voting should be introduced in our electoral process. Ghana just finished elections a few months ago, and they had early voting. I just think that if you empower the Electoral Commission with the cooperation of different stakeholders, the issue about the trust deficit within our electoral system will be addressed.
All right, Sami Tudu, thank you very much. I mean, I'm sure that's a point or the blessing I just want to mention that some persons have also argued. The diaspora votes that we are seeking to aggregate into our election system. We also have to be concerned, these are not necessarily taxpayers in the Nigerian system. Perhaps if they're also paying taxes, then they could also have a voice. That's one point that's been made. But IPAC National Chairman, what is your reaction to the comments made by some persons that politicians, we're not putting you on the spot, but that politicians and political parties are the most vehement in kicking against the introduction of technology into our electoral system? One, all this biometric registration now, these things will tend to frustrate the avenue for rigging because the politicians or their agents will not be able then to accumulate fake voters' cards, which they can then use to manipulate the election. If you have card reader, you cannot bring in fake persons, to come and be changing the figures. Why have politicians, in some cases, often resisted this change?
No, in the actual sense, political parties are in support of electronic voting in Nigeria. In the last stakeholders meeting we had with INEC, it presented this issue to us, and we all approved that they should go ahead with it. It's a good process, and we even commended a Senate. The Constitution is against, does not allow using e-voting in Nigeria. But the Senate, the Constitution, yes. But the Senate has set the ball rolling now. They have started the amendment, and it is now going to the House of Representatives. Which, if they do that, I'm sure it is going to allow use of electronic in our electoral processes and electoral system. I'm telling you this with voice of all political parties that we are in support of e-voting in Nigeria. We are all in support because that is the only way Nigeria can have peaceful voting. We have seen the side of this at the last general election, where the introduction of this card reader, helped in reducing number of litigations. So I believe if electronic system is brought, it will automatically, kill the use of, the number of litigations in our courts. But there is one area, I still want to address. We want all political parties to have a level field, playing ground when it comes to participation in electoral processes and election. The recommendation made by the committee is a welcome idea to us, scrapping state electoral commission, because small political parties can perform, can participate and perform well at local levels. But with what we are seeing today, the state governors don't allow political parties to participate evenly. Any state that has a governor, it is his party that wins all the elections, 100%. But if this SEC is scrapped and INEC, and it is centralized, I believe political parties will have ways of.
What does that do to our federalism?
What does it do to the federalism as a system?
It's federalism. We're talking of how we want political parties and our political process to be updated. And the only way we can do a good election that is acceptable to all is by allowing political parties to participate evenly at all levels.
Okay, Kingsley, we have other tweets coming in.
That's right. Let's take the next set of tweets now. Blessing. Yes.
Okay, start off with that of Unisa, with the Twitter handle Unisa55. Independent candidate is better to engender people with integrity and stop godfatherism, provided election expenses is checked.
And Law Alpha C tweet said there's no way Nigerian brand of lawyers will not see lacunas in the recommendations to satisfy the yearnings of They're masters, it says. Who are the masters of the lawyers? Not indicated, yes.
Well, people will know better. Victor Ohiesumwa says most of the recommendations were captured in the last abortive constitutional amendment by the 7th National Assembly. Implementation is key.
Festus Akimboyewa tweets again, we should focus on tackling corrupt practices and miscellaneous offenses that always characterize our elections. We will have credible elections in Nigeria when we start to treat cases of election offenses as special crimes that attract severe punishment.
From Dele Jack Solomon, politics aside, a fantastic job done by the Namani-led committee on electoral reforms. We hope its reports will be implemented this time.
All right, well, those are the tweets that we have in the meantime. I just would like to return to Professor Maman. Professor Maman, earlier we talked about the recommendations for, political party registration and regulation. And then there was also the issue of, cross-carpeting and people dumping political parties and so on and so forth. What, in your opinion, again, I mean, your committee has already submitted this report, what is the fine relationship that we can establish between political parties that are indeed not political parties and the kind of fluid membership that we find today? Festus Okoye was saying earlier that there are probably some persons, who have the cards of various political parties, and therefore they are hopping from one platform to another. How then can we use that? I mean, what we are seeing now with the nature of the political parties, fluid as they are in terms of their membership, as well as trying to deal with the question of cross-carpeting, which is already very well addressed in the 1999 Constitution.
Yes, thank you very much. We have also addressed this issue of cross-carpeting, and it has already been dealt with in the Constitution, but we are making it more difficult now to cross-carpet. We say the only reason you can leave a political party on the platform of which you won the election is when that party has been deregistered. If that party has been deregistered or it has gone into a merger with another political party, then you have no option than to leave the party to another political party. Otherwise, automatically, your seat will be declared vacant, and the INEC will now conduct another election into that office. So this is what we have done on this aspect to ensure that politicians are discouraged from defecting to other political parties after they have actually been voted into their offices on the platform of those political parties.
What could happen, Sam, Itodo, what could happen? Yes, you say, if assuming I'm an elected official, unless my party is deregistered or will go into a merger, and then I say, look, listen, I'm not comfortable with this platform, let me leave. Suppose I choose to be a recalcitrant member of my own political party. What could therefore be the role of internal disciplinary processes of a party on a member who is already elected? In that, maybe I don't pay my dues, I don't do anything, and so on and so forth. I don't fulfill, my obligations as a live and living member of that political party. Could that also be a ground for loss of office after election, assuming that is reasonable?
Well, I think that it's really critical, and again, I've not read this report, and so I don't know what sort of mechanisms are in place to check the issue around cross-carpeting. I think that to strengthen political parties properly so-called must have internal disciplinary mechanisms to discipline their members, because that's why they are an institution. And I think to the extent, because if you look at the several Supreme Court judgments on votes in an election, they go to the party. And so, because we don't have independent candidacy mainstream now in our electoral process, the fact that they go to the political parties, it makes the political parties very, very serious institutions. So I think the parties should actually discipline their members. But the Constitution also provides for recall. Now, as much as these votes go to the parties, when constituents are not satisfied with their representative, they are the only ones who can recall their party members. So the parties, to ask the parties to withdraw or discipline recalcitrant members, I think might be an illegality and might promote injustice to a very large extent. So I will still adopt the provisions in the Constitution in relation to recall, because if you look at it, the votes for the parties or the individual, a lot of times when people go to vote, to an extent they are not necessarily voting for the parties. They are voting for the candidates and their manifesto and their ability to repose confidence in the voters. So it's a bit of, it's neither here nor there, but I don't think that the parties should have the power to withdraw or discipline their members to the extent that they leave office. Rather, the voters who actually voted for them. But we must also look at this from another perspective, because if someone is in a party and there's an implosion within the party and the ideals of the party are not in conformity with your own individual ideals, I don't think that it should be criminal for someone to move from a particular platform to another. Okay. However, I think it's a bit of a moral issue, which I think we need to really look into.
It's definitely a blessing. What recall was one of the topics that were discussed on the program last week. Okay. A recall of elected officials. And the provisions in the Constitution, the threshold, of course, is quite almost impossible. We have not had any successful cases. There have been attempts. In fact, we had a member of the House of Representatives from Jigawa, against whom there was such an attempt, to recall him following the fiasco of the third-term agenda under the Obasanjo administration. But it didn't quite work. Perhaps now you say, look, listen, have recourse to that, but there are also recommendations that to say, look, lower the threshold for a recall and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think we have done that in our committee.
Yeah, all right. So what do we have there?
What we have now, the most difficult thing is to have majority of votes of registered voters in that constituency to actually vote yes for recall. What we have done is now to make it not majority of registered voters, just majority of votes cast during the referendum. Okay. Doing away with majority of registered voters. Right. Because even presidential elections, you can hardly have even up to 50% of registered voters voting in that election. So if that is impossible, it means you cannot ever have a recall in Nigeria. So we have lowered the threshold now to majority of votes cast, simple majority of votes cast in the referendum. Right. So it is now doable.
Thank you very much, Professor Lawan. Now we're on the home stretch on this conversation, no doubt. So, Mr. Okoye, quickly and briefly too, there is one question that I still have to post from a producer. Constituency delineation says a constitutional provision, and at the moment, constituency delineation appears to be a strong issue that generates controversy whenever it occurs. And many also say it's out to happen more regularly. How will the center resolve this, even as we look towards 2019?
Well, constituency delimitation is both a legal and a political issue. I think that it is important at this critical stage of our development for us to resolve the issue of constituency delimitation. This is because on account of environmental factors, on account of conflicts and other factors, so many constituencies have been disfigured. For instance, in the northeast of Borno, Yobe, and some other places, you can see that our constituencies are no longer constituencies in the true sense of the word. And also in some other places, there have been population movements and so on and so forth. So it's important for us to take a second look at our constituencies and see in what ways we can redraw or redraft our constituencies to meet the changing realities, because a situation where you still retain the same constituency that existed almost 15 years ago with nobody there, with constituencies where there has been so much population movement, does not make sense. In the last 10 years, the influx of persons into the Federal Capital Territory has been massive. And to that particular extent, we need to redraw our constituencies and also look at population movements in terms of the voting strength of the various constituencies. But the Justice Uwe's committee recommended a constituency delimitation commission drawn with membership from the Independent National Electoral Commission, National Population Commission, and all the organs dealing with issues around population and so on and so forth. But I think that the present committee recommended maybe a similar thing, but a different model. But I think that for the purposes of the 2019 elections, we should allow sleeping dogs to lie. Immediately after the elections, we can deal with it because, as I have pointed out, it is both a legal matter and also a political matter. If we deal with it now that we are going to enter the critical season of politics, political considerations and political issues will overshadow the merits of whatever we are going to do. So I support that issues around constituency delimitation, issues around having a different threshold for the swearing in of elected officials in terms of disposing of all election petitions before anybody is sworn in. We can deal with all these issues after the 2019 elections before we get into the main area of politicking. By then, people are sober. As we are moving into the 2018 period now, people will no longer be sober. Everything will be seen from the prism of politics, and it will dilute the merits of issues. So let us leave that one for now, and then we can pass the law, but issues around its implementation should occur after the 2019 elections.
I don't know, Festus, if you can hear me clearly, I'm wondering, you say that we are moving now into the 2019 election mode. This is almost midterm for the administration, but there are some persons who also hold the view that, I mean, we will have an election season virtually year in, year out, month in, month out. That part of the challenge that you saw in terms of the leadership crisis, the election and the work of the leadership crisis in the National Assembly arose from the fact that by 2015, people were already having projections for 2019. So what guarantee is there that in 2019, there won't be calculations almost immediately for 2023, especially as probably will be shifting at that time? So when is the right time to do constituency delimitation?
Well, Kingsley, I think questions, those are questions we keep ruminating on. Constitutional lawyer Festus Okoye, you joined us from Kaduna studio. Thank you very much. It was a great delight having you on the program again today. Also, would like to thank Professor Maman Lawan, Secretary, Constitution and Electoral Reform Committee, and also Dean, Faculty of Law, Bayero University, Kano. Thank you very much, Professor Lawan.
My pleasure.
Honorable Mohammed Lawan Nalado, National Chairman, Accord Party, and also National Chairman, Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC. Thank you very much for coming on the program. And sending out the list, Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement, Yaga. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
It's always a pleasure.
Okay, Kingsley, to other segments.
All right, now let's take a short break. When we return, we'll be taking sports.
Olachi, come and receive your punishment.
I'm sorry, ma.
Olachi, come one.
I am something. You mostly depend on me for the smooth running of the domestic activities of your family.
Make sure you prepare food. That rug in the visitors' room.
Yes, ma.
Wash it thoroughly because that thing has been smelling.
I am a helper in your family and business. Many times you thank me with a slap.
I said it.
House help, gateman, sales girl, PA, and so on. This week, Professor John Bull takes a deep look at issues of assistance in life jackets. It is funny.
I doesn't want that.
This man, they look forward to give belly.
It is deep.
Showing at 8:30 p.m. every Tuesday and Friday on NTA Network International and Star Times.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
Welcome to the new speed of life.
TV Guide magazine is out with fabulous Fab Funke Akindele Bello, aka Jennifer, adorning the cover. She opens a secret not known even to her family. Find out the secret. NTA turns 40 this year. The challenges, the emerging trends in broadcasting, and the way forward. Weekend Dealer 2. Meet the team behind the biggest deal on NTA. Is food still the way to a man's heart? If not, what else? This edition is hot and juicy. Meet your star faces on screen. Entertainment, fashion, young minds, social media, and great personality.
This is idiosyncratic and heterodox.
Yes, Professor John Bull is on the radar. Find out what makes this program the rave of the moment on NTA Network. And for the Prof,
over and out.
TV Guide. Ask your vendors or book your copy at every NTA station nationwide. TV Guide. Still your indispensable companion.
Admission forms for the 2017-2018 academic session of NTA Television College JAWS into its diploma programs are now on sale. The diploma programs are in film and TV production, broadcast journalism, and TV engineering technology. Applicants are required to have at least 5 credits, including English language and mathematics at SSC, NECO, or GCO levels in not more than 1 sitting. Application forms can be obtained from the TV College Refi JAWS or at any NTA zonal centers nationwide on payment of a non-refundable fee of 7,500 naira in bank draft in favor of NTA Television College. Completed application forms should be returned to the office of the academic secretary, NTA Television College, or the center of purchase on or before 28th of July 2017. For further inquiries, please call 0806 980 9807 or 0703 660 7155. NTA Television College, training you to be the best you can be.
All right, you're welcome back. Let's quickly join our correspondent Victor Azu for details in our sports package.
Good morning.